a no Q&A anymore. Hi, everybody. This is Joanne from Read Science, and I am joined here with my co-host, Jeff Schomeyer, as always. And today we are so honored to have with us our guest, Barbara Oakley. Say hi, Barbara, really quick.
Well, hello, hello.
Yeah, so Barbara, I've gotten to know Barbara over the past 7 or 8 years because the first time I decided to darken YouTube's footsteps was with a book review about her. Well, it's not your first book. I forgot about your first book, but the first book I found out about was called Evil Genes. And the subtitle, I think, was what got me to buy it. Why Rome Fell, Hitler Rose, and Ron Failed, and my sister stole my mother's boyfriend.
Oh.
Okay, and I went, okay, I should check this out. And anyway, so that was the first book I read, first book I reviewed, of yours that I read, and first book I reviewed. But since then, you have been very busy, and we are so fortunate to have you tell us all about your books. But I do want to mention, first of all, her latest book, and I'm sorry, you guys, I have the galley, so I've got the black binding, Mindshift, Breakthrough Obstacles to Learning and Discover Your Hidden Potential. And so I think, you know, this probably falls under self-help, but it's also science. You've got neuroscience, which you started to delve into, and we're looking forward to your story. But she's also got this book, which has done very well, A Mind for Numbers, How to Excel at Math and Science, even if you flunked algebra. But this book was turned into a Coursera MOOC, which is one of the largest Coursera MOOCs, isn't it?
It is. It's actually, as far as we know, it is the largest MOOC around. We've had nearly 2 million registered learners, but there's also a MOOC for Mindshift. So
that's right. That's a new one.
Complement one another. Yeah, but I think people often don't know that my work in teaching and learning that relates to neuroscience all grew out of the research I did initially when I was working on the book Evil Genes.
Evil Genes, yes. So, and actually, so if you read anything of Barbara's, you will learn a little bit about Barbara, and including that you were in the Army, that you were a Russian translator, you met your husband at the South Pole Station, that you're an engineer, and now you delved into neuroscience and education. So This is, you know, rather than a formal biography here, reading a bio of yours, I'll just summarize, because I'm hoping you'll talk about this because this is sort of the essence of Mindshift. We can change our mind, and we can change our lives, and we can find out that we can do all sorts of things. And you're sort of like the embodiment of the book. You know, what I know about you, I'm like, well, okay. This is, you're like the living example, even though you use lots of other real life examples.
I think part of it is looking back and really thinking about, you know, why have I made so many changes, and how has that evolved to be, you know, something that generally people really like. I think it has to do with just being really learning to be comfortable with feeling like an imposter who wasn't really as good as everyone else, who's just playing catch up. And I've done that so many times that now I'm kind of used to it. So even when I was working on the book Evil Genes, so what Evil Genes was about was my oldest sister was, shall we say, a problematic person.
She stole your mother's boyfriend. I'd say that's problematic.
Yeah. And my parents still always loved her, even though she was really a very troubled person. And part of what happened was when she was 3 years old, she got polio. And it, I would say, basically really set her life completely off course. And the more I researched it, the more I found out that, you know, polio, in some small portion, it affects everyone's brains. You know, if you get polio, it always has some damages some motor neurons and other areas of the brain. Many people recover from this and are highly successful in their lives. And in part, I think it's, the challenge of overcoming polio can sort of set you on a course of where you're trying to improve yourself. So it helps change your own attitude and helps you to be successful. But in a small number of people, the brain damage can be really quite severe. And my sense is that it damaged her attentional abilities. So she would do things like she ran away from home when she was about 19, and she was gone for 10 years. And my parents, of course, were really beside themselves. But at the same time, she was an adult. You couldn't look for people the way you can now. It was much harder to just disappear. And so she was gone 10 years. And then suddenly she contacted my father and said, "I'm so sorry for what I've done." She had a very tumultuous childhood, and I'd just love to come home and say I'm sorry and start afresh. And of course, my father was absolutely thrilled at this. So he sent her the money so she could fly home, and she spent it on something else. And so he sent her more money, and she didn't get tickets. She spent it on something else. So he finally got smart and sent her the actual tickets that she needed, the plane tickets. So she came, and I remember her coming up and hugging me, and she was like, "Barb, I'm so glad to be home to see you, to see the family, and I'm just so thrilled to learn what you're doing and spend these next weeks just sort of becoming reacquainted." And then she excused herself to go down to the store. She met a man who she'd never met before, moved in with him, and I didn't see her for another 5 years. And so you might think, well, that's pretty crazy. But actually, as I came to discover, her attentional mechanisms were really challenged. There was damage there due to the polio, and she was one of those ones where the damage was clearly, it's a good guess, it was quite substantive. And so I wasn't standing in front of her at that store. I was still back at the house. But that guy at the store was right in front of her. He had her attention. So she forgot about everything else and moves in with this guy. And so wondering about things like this, about the kinds of things she could do to my parents just obliviously, without even thinking about it. And I began to wonder, now, wait a minute, I'm a professor of engineering. I should, even if I don't know neuroscience, I should be able to at least look at the research literature and see what it says about mean people who do stuff like this. Not psychopaths per se, but just kind of mean people. And so I started looking, and, I found this, term in psychology, for, sort of Machiavellian kind of personalities. And I was like, great, here's the term, I'll go Google it up. I'll look at what science says. And then I found out that all these psychological papers had no scientific foundation whatsoever. It was just a bunch of people kind of, farting around, coming up with stuff. And I mean, I shouldn't be so facetious, but actually I should be, because there was no there. And so I wrote about the fact that psychology had a lot of spurious notions and ill-founded publications that really had no scientific backing whatsoever. And that was part of the whole book, was sort of trying to tease out, why do people do mean things? What do we know from research? What is actually substantive from research? And it was far less at that time than I ever dreamed. And so the reaction to the book was kind of funny, because I sat there for I'm going on here, but this is like
That's okay.
Go ahead.
nobody ever, it's been a while back, and so people don't usually realize the connection between what my work involving neuroscience is and how it all grew out of working on this book. But I sat there, I was trying to get tenure. My father had Alzheimer's. I had my family with our two small children, and I'm also trying to work on this book in the background. And thank goodness my husband is Philip is just he's a wonderful human being. That's the smartest thing I ever did, was say yes to that man when he proposed. But for 6 years I worked in the background of working on this book, Evil Genes, about what we really know about sort of why do people do nasty things who are not necessarily evil people, and trying to tease out the difference between biology and upbringing and environmental influences. And I remember at the time going, why on earth am I doing this? Nobody is ever going to read an engineer's take on psychology. But at the same time, it was like, wait a minute, this is a big story that there's no there in psychological research in this area. And so fortunately, when the book was published after 40 publishers rejected it, and then it got superlative reviews from the likes of Steven Pinker and some really top people. So it was like a lot of work. But what that really was doing, I didn't realize it at the time, was setting the stage for work in other areas.
I think Mindshift may have spoken particularly to me because I've been a restless career person, and I'm a pretty long distance, at least it would appear to most people, it doesn't seem that far to me, from the physics lab I was doing research in 30 years ago. I still feel like I'm solving problems and finding interesting things, but I'm not doing the physics research. And one thing that seemed like a main theme for me, and you said, I'll quote from something near the end of the book, where you said, mind shift, deep changes in life that occur through learning is something that can be done at any age with any goal in mind. So I'd like to kick you off and say, well, let's talk about for a while the importance of continuing to learn, and how can people return to learning who've lost the habit?
That is such a great question. I'd like to hear, how do you keep with continued learning?
For me, I think if I can find a new thing to move into, I usually feel at my freshest when I'm learning how to solve the problems at hand. And so I went from the physics lab at low temperatures, then I went and I did a space shuttle experiment. Well, we had lots of aerospace to learn about, microgravity science. I had moved into, this was an optics experiment, and I'd never done optics before, but I brought along expertise at temperature control. And then later on, I went to an aerospace company, so I had some aerospace experience and milieu, and I already had done a lot of computer work, because our experiment on the space shuttle was automated, and I was in charge of most of that because it interested me for years. And so I did a lot of computer things. I worked with a group that was building a new computer for the Hubble Space Telescope. And then I also worked with a friend who was interested in doing satellite communications for, of all things, deep sea ocean buoys. So he'd gotten some money from the government to collaborate with Woods Hole. That spun off into a corporation that we started to do basically cheap satellite communications. And this is now almost 20 years ago, when it was not a thing that everyone could do easily and buy off the shelf. And then I was ungainfully underemployed for a number of years. And someplace in there, Joanne and I started doing this, which is at least fulfilling, if not remunerative. And then a friend, a neighbor actually, who works here at Gallaudet in the Office for Students with Disabilities, said, I think we need a new handbook. This is while I was still at home. Do you think you could write one of those? I said, sure, I could write one of those, because I've also been writing fiction now for the past 10 years. I think I can write it. So I did. And she says, oh, couldn't you come in for a few days a week? And so I'm now working full-time here, doing all of the communications things. And that's communication stuff and science stuff. And here I am with Joanne doing science communications. And the learning just seemed to be a natural thing because I get restless at doing the same thing over again. And so I have to change, and change means learning new things, and learning new things when it's to solve something at hand is the best way to, is the most productive way for me to learn. And it's exciting. But you do have to get with that thing, that fear of, that you mentioned someplace else, of the pain of learning new things because it's work, and that feeling of being the stupidest one in the place, but trying to get some work done. That was answering your question or something. You're going to tell me now about how to make lifelong learning a habit. And one other question that folds in from the book was, we have all of these interesting stories that you tell about people. Do you think they discovered principles that we can learn by induction, or are they more like inspiring stories that maybe won't apply? So all of these things, you know?
Oh, this is great questions. You know, I think part of what you and Joanne are doing here is part of the way to keep learning. Mm-hmm. So, for example, when we're sitting here thinking out loud and exchanging our thoughts, we are bringing our own reservoirs of a lot of things we've learned. And so just by listening, you're learning new things. You're like, you're tapping into people who've learned a lot of things and have insights to share. And it's sort of like they've worked for years to put together their thoughts on things. For example, when you're reading a book, and like when I worked on Mindshift, it's the culmination of, you know, decades of work. Mm-hmm. And so when you read the book Mindshift, or you read, a book like Cork Dork, that's the one I'm reading right now. I just love this woman. She spent several years learning about the world of wine, and it's like I can like learn all this stuff, but actually not have to get hangovers or anything while I'm like she did. And it's just a great way to learn, at least get a sense of things.
Well, I've learned an awful lot about biological topics, and we've had some really great discussions that concern cancer and genetics. And it's a great learning experience talking to people in my computer screen here.
Well, I think the biggest sort of breakthrough is online learning. Mm-hmm. Yes. I'm a big proponent of book reading, and I love reading books myself. I think there's actually research that shows that if you read for something like 3.5 hours a week, at least for the those involved in the study, the book readers, as opposed to the magazine readers and the blog readers and so forth.
We live longer through books.
Precisely.
And I do the diet age 200 because I'm currently on 3.5 hours a week.
Well, there's something. Do you notice this? When I got really busy. So you get really busy, and then you kind of fall out of that book habit, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And so when you intentionally decide that you're going to get back into that book habit, at first, it's really kind of hard to do because you're finding yourself reaching for your cell phone to check your messages and stuff. But if you set your cell phone away and kind of get yourself into, like wean yourself onto book reading, you're going to set your cell phone away for 10 minutes maybe, or 20 minutes, or a Pomodoro. And then you start reading, you feel this sort of, if you kind of push through the desire to reach for your cell phone, you begin to fall more into a sort of a comfort with what you're learning about or what you're reading about. and it's almost like parts of your mind relax.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's part of why people who read books live longer.
Maybe
Right.
there's
Yeah,
there's certainly pleasurable things involved about it, because a good book is not something that is satisfying just because we learn something new. The best books that we've read for Read Science, and an upcoming episode is a great reason to get back into the habit of reading. The best ones we've read are stimulating to read at the time when you're reading them. Maybe like taking the online course. And the thing you said in the book that reminded me, is like you say that online learning, you were convinced, is very conducive to the way that we actually learn things.
Well-made online learning absolutely is. Yeah. What kind of makes me laugh is that professors will also often demean online learning. Mm-hmm. And what they're really demeaning is like the worst, like really bad online learning. And there's a lot of really bad online learning. Sure. Because it's so easy to do bad online learning. Yeah. And a lot of the worst stuff is put out to sort of emulate the way we do things in classrooms. And in classrooms, you have students caged. Mm-hmm. So
and there's a lot of bad classroom learning, but it's not as visible as an online scenario.
That's right. I mean, it's a statistical truism to say that half of all teachers are below average, right? So when people go, oh, online learning isn't as good as face-to-face, they're somehow in their mind imagining this off-the-charts terrific face-to-face person, and this, fairly typical online stuff. Whereas if you get the best of online learning, it is in general better than any typical face-to-face teacher. Mm-hmm. And it can be more, more dynamic, more enthusiastic. But I think the big mistake that people are making now is that universities are really used to targeting the 18 to 24-year-old audience. Mm-hmm. But the lifelong learning is a big deal now. People are learning at all ages. So what really universities, great online providers are targeting the 18 to 80-year-old audience. Mm-hmm. But a lot of universities still don't get that. They think that they can make stuff that works for caged learners in a classroom instead of free-range learners.
No, they don't understand the older. And some of the people that you just were talking about, I think, have a faulty model of what learning is. And they tend to think of learning as something that's done to them rather than something that they do, which is something I just realized is common to all the people that you talked about in your book as examples. They all realize that learning is something that they're in charge of, is something that they do, not something that's done to them.
And it starts right off in Mindshift with the story of Claudio Meadows and the bus driver, as a bus driver, a very talented, intelligent woman who suffered from severe depression and could never really get herself out of it. And she finally realized that she really needed to actively play a role in her own recovery. Now, is she perfect with her recovery? No, but she's way better than she ever has been. And it's through her learning about what she's doing.
Do you think that's maybe that now that I've read it and I see it, maybe that is the best thing I get from the book is these stories that show me the not how to change careers, but the importance of learning, because being a lifelong learner is really a key to lots of opportunity when you're ready for it.
I don't think I've ever actually synthesized this before your question, but if there is one common strand, it is that each of those learners they began to realize that they had to take active control of their learning.
Yeah, I think so. Well, good. I hadn't quite seen it until just now either, but yeah, I think that's a lesson that we can learn from all of these fascinating stories about these people and all their differences. That is something that they strongly had in common.
It is funny because when I when I write a book, as opposed to making a MOOC, I want each one of them to be something that stands alone, so a person can take that MOOC or read that book and they're really happy. They don't feel like, oh man, I should have also been, why didn't I get the book? Or the book, is something that the MOOC builds on or something. Each one can feel really comfortable. But there's subconscious stuff that's going on. And now I'm realizing, like, one of the very first videos in the MOOC relates to the value of active learning. And so what I did was I took some video footage that I shot when I was in Taiwan eating stinky tofu and just sort of conveyed the idea that, the experience of actually doing something is irreplaceable, that's one of the most valuable. And it's funny because I don't have anything like that in the book. Except I do, in that the active learning is sort of a meta idea that's threaded through, but not brought forth as obviously as it is in the MOOC.
When I talk to people, I'm almost done, Joanne, maybe for the moment. I always talk to Joanne. Just one more. But when I talk to people about writing fiction, which is something that I've done for a while now, and stories that I've published, it's one thing that there are not very many experiences where I feel like when people say, oh, I think I can imagine what that would be like. I say writing fiction, but also any kind of writing, is really something that is not what you imagine it to be until you do. I think it's worth writing a story for the experience, because the experience itself is so much different from what you would imagine it to be.
Yes. All I can say is my hat is off to fiction writers, because it is such an incredibly difficult enterprise, and yet I think it's one of the greatest things that people can do in their. I just so admire. I'm so excited because next week I'm going to get to have dinner with Cormac McCarthy.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. He's like such a hero of mine. He's a really wonderful human being.
I know, and this is what you get for creating a MOOC and becoming recognized as someone who has a lot of information about education. You're providing valuable information for a lot of people. I mean, your MOOC is popular because people want to know this stuff. They struggle, like the learning how to learn, right? They struggle. How these people make it look easy, but I'm struggling, and I took a test. I thought I knew it, but I didn't know anything, right?
Yes. Although what's really odd is I first met Cormac McCarthy because of writing Evil Genes.
No,
Isn't that funny?
That's right. So we're circling you back.
There we go.
So, it's funny because some people out there may know I used to be a professional model. Now, I didn't say I want to be a professional model. I was going to medical school. I was not, you know what I mean? This was not something, but it was funny because, so I did that, and I went to college, and I went to, and I didn't think much of it until actually I did your book review, right? Because the kids and I got the camera, and I thought, oh, there's all these people online putting stuff online. Oh, what the heck? Let me just do a book review, because I don't want to have to think about 7 years or so, 7 or 8 years. And I thought, let me just do this. I'm in my lab. It was a noisy video because the ventilation is very loud in there, but for good reasons. But and it was funny because after I looked at the tape and I went, oh, I forgot I actually look okay on camera. You know what I mean? Like, yes, people paid me to be on camera, but this was never in the front of my mind that, yeah, oh yes, of course I look good on camera. You know what I mean? It wasn't until I looked at this little review I had done for you. I went, hey, oh, okay, I could see how this could be useful, right?
Well,
to capitalize on it, you know?
I remember just, didn't you do something with gummy bears?
Gummy bears, I did eventually, yes.
So it wasn't just that you looked, really good on camera. It was that you were really smart and funny, in doing things, bizarre things with science that, people weren't really thinking about at the time. And so I think you're a talent stack. You have many different skills
that they're in there somewhere. And well, anyway, so how do we get to read science? First of all, I meet Jeff, and we ran a little contest for kids and teens for reading science. But the thing is, Google Hangouts came out at a time where I'm tired of editing videos. And you talk about how editing videos is so important for a MOOC. And I do teach online, but not MOOCs. But I was tired of editing, tired of trying to figure this out. I'm just like, okay, there's a learning curve, and I learned some. But here, then I get to read, Google Hangouts, and I think, I can interview authors of popular science books. Wouldn't that be lovely? And then there's no production. I mean, the biggest production time is trying to get people to say yes. Usually they do, and agree on a time. But after that, here we are talking, and here, we get to talk to smart people, articulate people, and it goes straight to YouTube. I don't have to post-process it. Jeff does a little bit because he turns them into podcasts and things like that, so he helps out. But, it's wonderful because I get to collaborate with Jeff. I get to meet wonderful people. So for me, it was like taking stock of maybe weaknesses, and what's worth my time to work on or not work on. And this sort of came as an answer to some of the things I didn't want to continue to improve.
Reading books and talking to authors about it is mostly what we get to do. And, that's a pretty fine thing.
That is a fine thing.
That is an awesome thing. And also having a partner like, you have with Jeff it can be so fun. My husband Philip and I were at Coursera, for example, yesterday, and we were just critiquing people who are planning to do MOOCs and do videos and so forth. It was so fun, I mean, part of the reason it's fun is because you're not on the firing line yourself, right? Being videotaped, and so you're just watching somebody else, so you can completely relax because you're not being videotaped. But one thing that really struck me is sometimes you would meet people and they'd seem very just sort of like very, just people, nothing striking about them, that you would think. And they might be very shy and so forth. And then they're very resistant to going on camera, and you're thinking, oh man, what am I going to see here? But then when they go on for the camera, it would be like magic. There was so many great aspects. So Philip and I just had so much fun because sometimes he'd see things that I missed, or we'd see the same things and we'd both kind of reinforce one another, like really good hand gesticulation. And, here's my hand there, which actually I'm not, because I'm holding my computer here. It's on a pillow. So I think it's really fun and creative to work with someone who, in producing creative sorts of things like what you're doing with this Google Hangout.
It's stimulating for me. I can sit and think of things, and I can often be creative, but it nevertheless is all in my own voice. And sometimes, I write things, and I write more things, and I write more things. I say, please, somebody needs to write something because it all sounds like me, and there's no fertilization going on. It's just, it sounds too much the same to me. So working with someone is a very cross-fertilizing and stimulating sort
Oh
of thing
yeah.
to do.
Yeah. Because I know I can tend to get a little bit in my own rut. And sometimes it's frustrating because you're like, it takes so long to explain, what
am I doing? Where am I going?
Yeah.
Well, now you ran your first Coursera was in partnership with someone, though. This was not just you.
Right. So Philip and I did the course together. And I remember us looking at each other in the basement and going, why are we doing this? I mean, is anybody ever even going to watch this? And, because it was kind of nuts at the time. Very few MOOCs were out. There was like 200 MOOCs on Coursera. My editor is calling me and saying, and I talked a little bit about this in the book Mindshift. My editor is like, we need you to be writing op-eds and we need you to be doing this kind of stuff. And I'm like, no, I'm in the basement making a MOOC. And they're like, what's a MOOC? So that was kind of funny. But I do think that it's really fun writing books and making MOOCs, because each one is a very different way of conveying information, of teaching, and they're highly complementary. And I'm like, pinch myself, because how did I get lucky enough to just be at the beginning of the MOOC as a way of conveying information? Because it's almost like the way I naturally think. I like to think with lots of pictures, and it's kind of funny because sometimes I'll just sit there and what I'm thinking is really just sort of a boring piece of information that's important. But then when I go to script it and to envision it, all this funny stuff comes out that kind of brings it to life and makes it, but you can't do it as well there's some things you can do better in a book, and there's some things you can do better in a MOOC. And so it's fun contrasting those.
So here, I'm very well aware of your sense of humor. I mean, even your subtitle on Evil Genes, which literally got me to buy the book. It is funny. It is a joke. But you talk in Mindshift about how humor is so important. But then, on the other hand, I also hear, not from Mindshift, but other places, that humor is something you have to be careful with, because not everybody sees humor in the same way. So you must have a certain level of humor that's appreciated by a large number of people. Not an awkward humor, not a off-color humor, not a, you know what I mean? So your reviews are saying, she's great, she's fun, she's this, but humor, I think you have to be careful with. Not everybody gets it, right? And I bet you deal with people from around the world. That's the beauty of a MOOC. They're not just sitting in the USA. They're everywhere. They're India, they're China, well, maybe not China, but it depends on how their internet is.
Yeah, because sometimes we're there in China and sometimes we're not there in China. It is, because humor does not always translate. That's exactly right. But at the same time, what MOOCs can give you is the ability to do visual humor. Visual humor translates pretty well. So if you are, if you tell a witty verbal joke, it may or may not translate. But if you have some kind of, a little bit of wacky visual humor, it odds are it will translate pretty well. So I think that's the lucky thing about is that you can do so much more visual humor. I remember my publisher is Penguin Random House, and they are totally awesome. And I mean, I'm just saying that as sometimes I'll talk to authors and they'll say, you should self-publish. It's really the best way to go. And I'm just like, you have to deal with if you deal with a top-notch publisher like Penguin Random House, I feel that they really improve what I do. So, I'll turn my manuscript in And we may argue about stuff, but it turns out better for the fact that they are that they're partners in it. So, for example, when I first began working with them, I was like, I want more pictures. I just want more pictures, And they were like, no, because they're more of a verbal medium.
Mhm.
And I realized what I was really trying to do was I was trying to make sort of a written form of MOOC, that has lots of pictures in it. And so finally I acquiesced, and I know at the time they were just thinking, oh man, she's a jerk. What do we do? We're working with her. And ultimately they were right. I was wrong, but I was also kind of right in my own way. People really do like visual sorts of things with lots of imagery. I was just trying to do it in the wrong medium.
But you have plenty of pictures, for instance, in Mind for Numbers. Did they stop?
Oh, I wanted more.
Oh, I see. Because I'm like, look at these. We've got lots of pictures. And, your galley of Mindshift that, I don't know if that's representative of the final, but there's pictures in here of the people you spoke to, some mind map type things. And
oh, yeah. But like, I think I had a limit of 60, and I wanted like 150 pictures.
I see. Yeah. Well, then you reach a point. Is this a coffee table book or a reading book, right?
Yeah. And they were totally correct. And I'm so glad that I finally listened to reason. But see, that's where I would have kind of messed up if I'd gone off on my own and tried to create, my own self-published book. For one thing, I wouldn't have had the great marketing resources. These are really smart people who have a terrific network. But then for another thing, it just would have been more like a coffee table book.
Exactly.
It wouldn't have been as good. So I don't know. It's really fun working in these different kinds of creative mediums, like book writing versus MOOC making, and so forth. And for you, your artistic medium is in some sense Google Hangouts, which is really a creative medium.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, I feel I'm so glad. I hope they don't ever take Google Hangouts away.
Well, if they do, we will find we'll find another way to continue doing the fun stuff. Mentoring is on my list of things, is very trendy and has been for the last decade or so. And from some of the things you wrote, I think I agree with you that mentors are not people who are assigned by a lottery or something. It's like, oh, here's your mentor, go ahead. And it was very close, and that sort of circled around one of your people named Zach, I can remember. And the one thing he said, he was talking about apprenticeship, very close. He says it was really about finding positive sum relationships.
Yes.
I really liked that.
I thought we just had dinner with Zach. Let's see, was it last week? I think it was in New York City. And I thought that was such a perceptive comment of his about making mentoring be a positive sum sort of thing. And I think mentoring is kind of funny because it has, as you've mentioned, become trendy. And over the last decade or so.
Well, there's some interpersonal component too that you can't really assign, I think, that is essential to the trust, the bond, and the way that you get to that sharing of information back and forth that I think is missing from sort of mentoring programs.
Yep. And Zach was making that point too, that he felt that the mentors that he had, and Arnhem Rodick also talked about mentors, the electrical engineer turned woodworker. And he was like, the company would assign mentors sometimes and they just weren't the same as when. But I think a big thing, for a while there, I was getting these emails from people saying, just kind of out of the blue, saying, would you be my mentor? And sometimes they'd be rather long emails. And, it's out of the blue, someone I don't know, asking me to be their mentor. And it's like, it's kind of like saying, would you write me a blank check? Can I take, how much time are you, it's kind of saying, I want you to just write me a commitment that you're going to give me all these hours and you don't even know who I am. And that's what kind of gave me pause. So when I was exploring the idea of mentoring in the book Mindshift, one thing I wanted to, an important point I think that's sometimes not made is that people can mentor you and they don't even need to know that they're a mentor for you. And that you have to be very, very careful because, if you don't know that person, you really don't want to walk in and say, hey, please be my mentor, because it's kind of, it's sort of like saying, I mean, it's almost, you really.
It seems to me more like an arranged marriage, which might work occasionally, but doesn't seem like the way to go. It's like, hi, Barbara, I'll send you a long email. Would you be my girlfriend?
Yeah, well, it's not, I mean, like arranged marriages are actually very intelligently done a lot of the time. I mean, the parents are both looking really carefully at what's going on. But a mentorship where somebody just comes up and says, can I be your mentor, or would you be my mentor? There's none of that careful sort of thing.
Right. Well, and a lot of people, I hear this a lot from people who've gained notoriety on Twitter. They happen to be professors, but they've gained some notoriety somehow. And they're suddenly asked to mentor, from lots of people. And that's a lot of time, a commitment for the people who are being asked to be the mentor, right?
Yes.
They have other things to do. And actually, in a way, you could say, well, here's my body of work. And this is how I can mentor you, is you continue to engage with this. If you feel my information's valuable, and what's not valuable to you, just set it aside, right?
Right. Well, like today, I probably get maybe 20, 30 emails a day from people. And, just sort of with questions, advice, and so forth. And sometimes I can answer, and sometimes I just can't. But like this person was writing and saying, can you give me some insight about learning?
Wow.
And you're kind of like,
Read the book?
I've written a book about it. I have a big MOOC about it. I don't want to take the time to just stop and try to distill everything I've already put out, and much of it free. And so it's kind of funny. But then on the other hand, people they reach out to me and do a lot of mentoring for me, even though I don't know them. In other words, they'll write to me, like I have this wonderful, somebody who I don't know, wrote me several really good references of what's going on in neuroscience related to STEM education.
Oh, awesome.
And I was just like, I started looking at them and my jaw dropped, because they're exactly the kind of information that needs to get out there. And so I'm hoping this person hasn't given up on me, because the book came out, the MOOC came out, and so forth. And I haven't had a chance to really read through these things and then get back to them and then say, yes, I'm going to put it in a Cheery Friday email, even though they wrote me like a month ago or something. But it's like, wow, that was mentoring for me, from someone who didn't, and it was, and hopefully I can pass it forward, to so that others can use this incredible information. So that's a lucky thing for me, is that people will often reach out and just say, have you seen this? And it's super helpful information.
Right. Oh, and while we have you on the topic of Cheery Friday emails, so your outreach goes beyond just your books, beyond your MOOC. You have a Friday email that comes out every Friday, and it's cheery, and you're providing resources to people. I just want to make sure people know about this, so they could go to your website, sign up for this Cheery Friday email, and get this every Friday, except one day on Thursday. I remember that.
Yes. All they need to do is go to Learning How to Learn on Coursera, and you sign up for the course, and it's free. So if you see these, things that say, buy a certificate, you can buy a certificate, but you can take all the course and everything and get the emails, and it's all free. So I had no idea. I just started kind of putting together the Cheery Fridays, and now, I get off the elevator in Bogota, Colombia, and this woman just stares at me and goes, "Oh, I just got your Cheery Friday email today." But I think they're actually my way of continuing learning, because they force me to, I really try to read all the books. Like occasionally, today's Cheery Friday was something from, that my daughter had suggested. But I do a lot of reading, and it's, so the Cheery Fridays are beneficial for me in many ways, and they, kind of keep me on topic, I think.
Right. And there was, I just wanted to make sure I brought up Joshua Foer's book, Moonwalking with Einstein. That plays a big part in your Mind for Numbers, and I think it comes up in Mindshift as well. But I remember reading that book and loving that book, and I cannot remember if I did a video review of his book, but I meant to. Jonathan, or is it Joshua? Joshua, if I didn't do it, I'm sorry, but your book was great.
Yes.
Very good.
It's a really good book. And I hear, sort of behind the scenes through author gossip, that in real life, he truly is just a really, really nice person. And it just always makes me happy when I hear things like that.
All righty. So I have one more topic going back sort of to science.
Yep.
Because,
and we've got a hard end in 5 minutes, Jeff. Because,
I'm sure we can do this in just 90 seconds.
Okay.
But anyway, you wrote that we should avoid fooling ourselves, and I forget the context, but I remember thinking, boy, do you sound like Richard Feynman, who thought that the best way science, and he's willing to say science may not be the only truth ever, but it's the best way we have of not fooling ourselves. And at the time, you were talking about Joan McCord's research on the ineffectiveness of what some people describe as obviously useful social programs. So how to avoid fooling ourselves is a tricky one, isn't it?
It really is, because we often surround ourselves with people who believe the same way we do and think the same we do. And we don't like to hang out with people who are going to criticize our ideas, right? And yet, and so it's really easy to just think, man, whatever I'm doing is super helpful for other people. I know it. I feel it inside. In fact, I remember talking with this researcher, and she was going, oh, all the statistics, that's just sort of hand waving to, to convince people that we've actually really studied. But you and I already know that this is a good program. And I'm just like, no, we don't. Please don't do this, but it's actually done way more than we think, and the thing is, if you really want to help other people, and I do, the first thing you have to realize is that sometimes it's your helpful efforts that are, that make things worse. And so, but you try to tell people that sometimes, and they're like, yeah, but my thing is truly helping. I know it. I can feel it. And it's a really, really tough road.
So I'll finish the last piece of advice I wanted to quote because I was so amused by it and it seems so wise. Early on in the book, you told us to collect shiny objects.
That was Claudia. She was great. I love what she did with that. Collects shiny objects, and I still do that. I get, it's the essential idea is around you. Try to have things that make you feel better. They keep you upbeat, because there's already enough downbeat stuff going on around you all the time. And it's almost like the dirty stuff that just gets on you of a day. That's the reason that we take showers or take baths. And you need to always be taking showers and baths, I mean, at least, every once in a while.
Because motivation is like bathing. It
That's
wears
right.
off. It doesn't last.
That's right.
It doesn't last.
That's right. That was also in the book.
Yeah.
So we're down to 2 minutes. Before I give Barbara the last word, I do just want to say, if you have not picked up Mindshift, quick read, inspirational stories. There's a message in all of them. And of course, her Mind for Numbers. It's done really well for you. So this one's very good. And they're a great pair. Like peanut butter and jelly, you should put them together if you want these things, right? And so Barbara, is there anything else you would like to add before you have to go take your next phone call?
Yes, I would like to add that for you, if you're watching this show, keep on watching Joanne and Jeff, because they're incredible.
That is nice. That is wonderful. Thank you, Barbara.
Okay. Well,
and it's so good to reconnect with you, Barbara. I know it's been a few years.
Yes. Yep. But you're doing great work. And I think just by us watching, we learn a lot.
Yeah. When we hope, that's what we hope, give a chance for authors to share in a bit of a, more expanded format what they are doing.
Fascinating stories.
Very fascinating stories. Beats, even though NPR is great, they get 7 minutes. So here you get a chance to talk for an hour.
And it's the stuff I don't usually get to talk about.
Yeah,
exactly. All the interviews end up being the same. That's what authors tell us all the time. Oh, I never get to talk about this. Thank you for letting me talk about it. So Barbara, first of all, thank you so much for joining us. Really glad to have you on. Congratulations with all your amazing success with your books and your MOOCs. And I won't be such a stranger now.
Okay, it's a deal. Well, thank you both so much for having me on the show. And until next time.
Until next time, thank you everybody for watching. Thank you, Jeff, as always.
Thank you, Joanne.
We'll see you soon on Read Science. We got a lot lined up this month.